Welcome to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast, where non-diet nutrition, weight-inclusive care, and integrative health collide. We're your hosts, Dana Montes and Christina Hoyt, licensed integrative clinical nutritionists and body image coaches.
And we believe you deserve to have a joyful relationship with food in your body, even if you have a chronic health condition or symptoms that just won't quit. On this show, together and with our guests, we're bringing the real talk, no BS vibe with tangible tools to help you pursue health and wellness without obsession or restriction.
Remember our disclaimer, this podcast is meant for general information purposes only and should not be taken as a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Hi, welcome back to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast. I have Dani on today from Kid Food Explorers. And Dani, I'd love for you to kind of introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into all of the things Kid Food Exploring.
Absolutely. Hi. Thank you so much for having me here today. So my name is Dani Lebovitz, and I am a pediatric dietitian and early childhood food education expert. And my background is actually really clinically based in nutrition. I interned at Johns Hopkins, and I worked in the HIV unit and cancer and a very broad educational experiences. I was a renal dietitian. I worked as a clinical dietitian in hospital. But I have always loved education and working with kids. My first job was at the Denver Art Museum working in the education department. Wow. And when I was an intern, I worked for a program that went into 2nd, 4th, and 6th grade. And I brought a program to the Air Force Base that I was working at. There was it's still around, highly celebrated NIH-funded study that had a whole curriculum plan, and I was so excited to bring it to the base we were working at, which was in Middle Georgia. And I was very much in the mindset of childhood obesity is at epidemic proportions, and that we needed some tools to use with our families on our Air Force Base in Middle Georgia. We're a military family. And when I started teaching the curriculum, and I actually brought it into the community and was volunteering at a Boys and Girls Club, I saw the harm that I was causing on little faces. And so at the time, I was also taking master's level coursework, and I decided to use kind of like a thesis project to explore a new way to introduce nutrition and food education that was free of harm and shame and inclusive of everyone. So that's my work background. And I am also a mom of 3. I have 3 girls. Their ages 3, 5, and 7. And my husband is in the Air Force, and we are always on the go with our family and all the craziness.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I really appreciate you sharing, and also sharing the realities of your evolution in this field. I think a lot of times people don't share some of the stuff that they did in the past, where it's like, this is real. Like, this is how you learn, right? And I've never hidden from people that I worked in a functional doctor's office, and then started seeing the harm in a lot of these like food is medicine type of language and moralizing of food and stuff like that, and how it got intertwined with bodies. And so I really love how you noticed pretty early on what this was doing to kids, and what this was maybe doing to parents too, and how overwhelming parents can feel with a lot of these internal and external conflicting expectations and information. And so I think part of it too is that it just becomes so moralistic and shaming, which it sounds like that's what you noticed. And I think it can become even more so when you're a parent who maybe has a child who's not as inspired to try different types of foods or isn't as exploratory. I have one who's like that, and one who is very exploratory and then has their little phases of all of the things. So I'm curious, what led you to create Food Kid Explorers? Is it part of that journey, or was there even more to the story from there?
Yeah. So I think another interesting part is that 1 in 4 military families is food insecure. And many communities around military bases are at or below the poverty line. And so there is a lot of access issues with nutrition and food and education and the knowledge around those foods. And so when I was in the community and I was teaching what I thought was this great program, I was so excited. Like, we had to apply for this grant and bring these programs to bring the program in to get the curriculum and the activities. And then when I started teaching it, literally the harm that I saw was on little people faces, and listening to their responses and how they interpreted the information. And here I am teaching about sugar and, the harms and, making them pick, which are the good snacks, or it was the red light, yellow light, green light. And these kids, number one, don't make any of the food or purchasing decisions. And number two, their parents that are, even if they have knowledge about food and nutrition, wasn't necessarily accessible. So, in addition to recognizing the harm, what I also found was there was a real lack of meaningful connection and knowledge. And so while I was teaching, I had this idea. I know that these kids may never make it to a farm, and they may never learn where their food comes from. And I can't bring them there. But what I can do is I can bring a book and I can share that book with them. I can connect them to that information. And then when my husband got back from a deployment, we went on a trip and we were in Costa Rica, and there was a pineapple farm. And on that pineapple farm, I had this huge light bulb moment and epiphany. And as I'm sure you know, as a dietitian, you could tell someone all the nutrition in a pineapple, and you could talk about all the enzymes and how they work and things you can do with that enzyme. But I had no idea how it was grown. Did you know that one pineapple grows on this enormous herbaceous plant, and they might only produce one pineapple in 18 to 24 months? And then when you get that, yes, and it's this huge plant, and it's this one pineapple in the center. And so then,
wow.
Yes. And then you think, oh my gosh, there's so much love and time and energy and effort put into this one piece of fruit, or this one fruit. How it then now makes sense why pineapples are so expensive at the store. Because at the time, pineapples were like $4 and $5 versus what you can get them now for like $2 or $3. And so I was like, there's my moment. I am going to take all of this information and put it into interesting, with interesting fun facts that really sparks curiosity in children. And I'm going to turn it into a book, and I am going to bring it to these communities that otherwise wouldn't have access. And so I finished my first book in 2013. So that was 2011, 2013. I finished my first book. I tried for 2 years to get a literary agent or publisher, and that was unsuccessful. So in 2016, I hosted my successful Kickstarter that raised over $10,000 to publish my first book, which is Where Do Bananas Come From? A Book of Fruits. And then the rest is history. And just have been creating food education ever since. And I think the part of this story, and that I want to get across, and sorry, this is long-winded, is that I think everybody gets into the field of nutrition because they want to make a difference. They want to help people. They want to help people live well and feel well. And a lot of dietitian stories start with this internal dialogue about their relationship with food. And my story starts with this relationship with how, as an educator and a person who is a medical practitioner, has vowed to do no harm, but even though I am trying to nourish these little bodies, I am affecting them on an emotional level with something, one, they can't quite comprehend based on their developmental stage. And number two, that they don't actually have the decisions to make for themselves and collectively. And that there's so much fear and harm and shame in these peer-to-peer communications because of the knowledge that I am sharing with them, because they might already feel ashamed based on what they have access to. And then they have peers that are shaming them because they're taking the information they have learned to shame them about what they're consuming too. And so I think differently. I learn differently. And I have decided, I have dedicated my work and passion to helping create an inclusive environment and building life skills around something that we do every single day, which is eat.
Yeah. I love that too, because I think like what I'm hearing in your story, like threaded throughout it, is about really wanting to help children and families have a lot of curiosity about food and to be kind of excited about the stories behind it, And I think, the more we can help our children and families have that curiosity with food and have it be fun and playful and think about it like exploring like these different types of things and textures and flavors and where is it coming from is a really fun way to kind of weave into this lifelong journey of feeding themselves so that they can create that and keep that going with them for as long as possible. And I think it's really hard to manage that because there is so much difficulty as a parent and, even as an adult, like choosing for yourself, even, right, is around this idea of what is quote unquote good for me versus what is not good for me. And there's a lot of moralistic aspects that get weaved into it, into a lot of our decisions. And I think sometimes we kind of forget what is realistic for us right now, given the capacity that we have. I think that's a really great thing that you mentioned about the kids. They can't make their food choices, and the parents are making their food choices based off of the information that they have and their children's preferences, right?
And the accessibility and what their culture and how they were raised. I mean, there's so much that goes into our feeding environment. And another key piece here is compassion for yourself, compassion for your peer, and compassion for the way you walk through life and feed your family.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think it's a very honest place to kind of start off with saying, like, hey, I need to be a little bit more compassionate. I need to make food fun. And I know as much as like any other parent out there, anytime I've tried to get my kid to do anything, that's the last thing that they're going to do.
And it's so developmentally appropriate, right? We're
Yes.
constantly fighting, and we're fighting for a thing that is intentionally built in. I mean, that's just developmental milestones, and building that autonomous choice and pushing back and learning that you can say no. We know about that. Why then are we fighting it in the food conversations?
Yeah, all the time. And I think too, like, it's so hard because my husband and I, Casey and I, talk about this a lot, that we sometimes get like lost in the meal. Like sometimes we think about the meal as this one meal, and this one meal has to be a certain way, or these are the things that we're having. And I think sometimes it's important to take a step back and be like, let's look at the bigger picture here. Do we really care if she's eating muffins right now as part of her dinner and not eating the strawberries that are part of the dinner? Or like, what is the thread that we're pulling long term here in a fight about food? And I think sometimes it's kind of hard to remember that, because I think that sometimes there is a lot of shame about the idea of catering to your kids, and your child's preferences can be really harsh, right? Like, I think sometimes my family will be like, well, Christina, are you going to let them eat that? My parents know, the family knows now, like, that I'm the nutrition expert.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm, a nutritionist. And I think it's a lot easier when you have that designation. That family's like, oh, you know what you're doing. And it's like, yeah, I do, kind of. I'm also exploring and figuring this all out. And each kid is very different. But I think there is a lot of shame around, especially for parents, when you try to cater to your child or honor your child's own personal preferences. And I have been really loving, you've been doing a whole series about this on your Instagram, like catering versus being considerate. And you have like a ton of different scenarios where you walk people through it. I would love for you to share a little bit about what inspired you to create that series. Like, how do you help people determine whether or not something's catering or being considerate? And what does it even mean to cater?
I would love to share that. So considerate, not catering, it looks different for every family. Like there is never a one size fits all when it comes to feeding kids. And I am a neurodiverse person, multiply neurodiverse, and I think differently. I walk through life differently. And that also brings in some lived experience of what it's like to be different. And so when I created this Consider It Not Catering series, I also brought into the fact that I have 3 kids. Now, I have 3 girls. They are all born in November, 2 years apart, and they could not be more different. And so this comes back to the idea is that you're a busy parent. You are trying to nourish your kids, and you want them to eat a variety of foods so they can get all the nutrients that they need to thrive. And then we bring into the developmental milestones and the autonomy building and making choices for themselves and learning about their taste buds and texture preferences because we all don't like the same thing. And so Consider It Not Catering for me is preparing one meal, but taking into account how my end eater will enjoy that meal. And each of them, like I said, has different flavor and texture preferences. So I actually have 2 kids who like spicy things or a little bit of spicy things or flavorful things, and one child who doesn't. So, and one child who does not eat anything soft, mushy, or squishy, but loves anything salty and crunchy. And so when I am making a meal, I always think about how will they enjoy it? And is there something that I can do in my preparation process to make it more appetizing for each of my eaters? So the difference between catering, in my opinion, is that I am not making a different meal for somebody because they don't like my meal. I am not changing what I am providing for a meal because one of my children doesn't like what I am planning to prepare, but I am making modifications to what I'm already serving. And the part that's important to consider here is that I always have at least one safe food at every meal. Now, a safe food is a food that your child likes and accepts. It may not be a favorite, but it's something that they will eat. And that can be anything really. And I also always have an alternative that is a no cook or no prep option for me, or very little. So if they get to the meal and they don't want what I've served, even if I have been considerate, and let's say it's tacos, I will take some of the meat out so it's unseasoned and have that to the side for the child who thinks that anything is that's flavorful is spicy. And I will have the seasoned meat. I won't construct the taco for them. I will serve it deconstructed, and then they can put it together, or they can eat it completely separate. You can even take little silicone liners and separate everything out on their plate so nothing touches. That's another level of consideration. I'm not catering here. It's just part of what I'm doing. But then we get to the meal and then it's like, no, tonight I'm not eating tacos. Then there's an option that's no prep. And for my house, that is usually like a yogurt or some string cheese or something that's really simple. Some families, it could be a peanut butter and jelly, whatever that you decide it is for you. But that alternative isn't a favorite food. Because then they'll likely choose it. I like to make those alternatives non-packaged food items that are really fun. It's like kind of something they like and it's fine, but it's kind of boring. And then the last element in here is I always have at least one fruit and one vegetable. And so that is not, I typically don't say like that is the safe food, because I know that if that were the safe food, then, and they eat that, just that at the meal, then they might not be entirely full. So that's kind of my approach to consider it not catering. And there's lots of tweaks and things that I make along the way. So I know like one of my kids doesn't like eggs. And so I'll overcook them and I'll take our eggs out of the pan and overcook a little bit to try and build that skill. Or I'll make everything except the eggs for her, or I'll crisp up some cheese or something like that. But it's thinking about what you're making and then how you can help your child, the one that isn't as exploratory, enjoy it, and mirroring those flavor and taste bud or texture preferences that feel safe for them.
Yeah, I love this because I feel like it kind of builds an addition onto Ellen Sater's division of responsibilities in a way, right? Where sometimes I think, I don't know what your thoughts are on that, so I'm really putting you on the spot here.
Sure.
But I think like sometimes that can come off as so limiting. Sometimes the way that you look at it, like, oh, I decide what we're having. And then you say to your kid, like, that's it. Like, you're having whatever I'm in the mood for today.
Exactly.
And I think sometimes about what that would feel like if someone were to tell me that, like, this is what we're having, regardless of whether or not you like it. If someone served me tuna casserole, I'd be like, well, damn, I don't like tuna.
Right.
I really don't like it. Why do I have to be forced to eat this thing? Now, granted, if I didn't have any other options, maybe I would just, eat it, because eating's better than not eating, obviously. But I think that doesn't make for the building blocks of an enjoyable food experience. And I think sometimes when we think about the division of responsibilities as so steadfast and strict, we're really we're losing the heart of the entire experience. And that is bringing joy and fun and
comfort and skill and
exactly
all those things
to the table. And that the whole family experience gets lost when it becomes that.
So 2 things here. Number 1, Ellen Satter has created a incredible framework and basis for early childhood feeding. And I am not an Ellen Satter expert. I have never taken any of her courses, but I am very familiar with the division of responsibility, and I have a lot of respect and an appreciation for the structure. With that said, there's no one size fits all, and there is a lot that doesn't align with me, especially being a neurodiverse person and recognizing the challenges that other people have. And specifically when we get into kids with pediatric feeding disorders, or, it's, we know about ARFID. We know there are kids who have, maybe low muscle tone or mechanical challenges. And so the expectation that I'm the parent, I am going to decide, just doesn't really sit well with me. And it works for a lot of families. And I feel like it's supportive in a lot of ways for a lot of people. But the way I live my life and the way that I create education and structure is that I will teach you how to think, not what to think. And I lived my life being this othered person, and it's a problem to be fixed when you are othered. And instead of being othered, if I can teach you, here's how to think, you don't have to make accommodations, say, to Ellen Satter's body of work. It is naturally built in to the way you offer and provide meals. So you are not a problem because this doesn't work. It's just is. And this is how we do things to help everybody enjoy a meal. And then the other thing that I want to mention here, and this is a common theme in the feeding space, and every picky eater book you always see. I just came in December, I released my book, Becoming a Food Explorer. And this book is from the premise that here we are always talking to kids these days about body boundaries. We're talking about consent. We're building, these skills that say you matter. You need, if you don't want to hug Uncle Creepy, you don't have to hug Uncle Creepy. Like, we're telling kids that they get to make these choices for themselves because we know the harms in overriding those cues. But all of that goes out the window, and you don't matter when it's around the table, because around the table,
true.
I'm in charge. I'm the parent. You're going to eat this. You're going to sit here till it's done. You need to have 2 more bites. Like, why we are not building food and body trust. We are not creating an environment of felt safety. We're not helping kids listen to their internal bodily cues. We are teaching them that the number one thing that matters is that you're eating what I'm providing to you. And I'm going to tell you when you feel or how you feel about this meal, instead of actually creating an environment where they feel welcome, where they can connect. There's times of rapid growth where kids are eating an insane amount of food and you're like, how did you just eat all of that? And there are times when you're like, you ate nothing. How are you going to sleep through the night, kind of thing? And that is where we build trust and skill. And so the idea here and the premise behind that book is, I want you to learn how to eat for yourself for a lifetime instead of eating to please me in a certain way to please me around my table. And so the rest of my work that and all of my books and printables that I've created throughout the years have been with the understanding that children are unique individuals and that they have this autonomy. And I lived through that experience. But what I realized is that when it comes to the table, they don't get that privilege, which shouldn't have to be a privilege. And so I needed to back up to then create this resource that was an invitation that you matter. You have consent. And then let's also build those skills. Let's learn what flavor and texture preferences we like best and learn descriptive words. And that doesn't feel safe. Well, that's okay. We don't have to eat it, but why don't we do something really cool, like sensory exploration, or we can do a STEM or STEAM activity. I integrate food education with science, technology, engineering, arts, and math that is led by a child's natural curiosity and wonder to take interest in a food, harnessing the language of childhood so that they then have that pressure-free exposure and may decide to eat it. And so it's giving the power back to the child, and it's the invitation and helping parents provide a space that's safe for everybody, but doing it in a way that feels really supportive for me as the parent, because I'm not preparing 2 meals, that also values the child.
No, I'm really appreciating where you're coming from and what you're sharing here with all that. And I can picture it on my own table, and I can see how everything, like the way that we're building the blocks, right? And I think sometimes we think of, well, we need to just get them to eat. And I think that sometimes, yes, if you have an undergrower, right? Right.
Sure.
And you are, but that's also to me the aspects of being considerate and providing the safe food. I know my daughter, one of my youngest is an undergrower. And so I know that when I serve something that's going to be a little bit different for her or a little bit challenging, I have to maybe have, an emergency pack of yogurt available, right?
The thing is, you need a reframe for your mind. Okay. So
Yeah.
this is a reframe for you. Okay. You are not catering. you know, tonight you're making this challenging meal and you're not going to cater to this child. So you are adding to this meal and incorporating it as part of the meal as a safe food. What I don't do is I don't advertise my alternative. Like, let's say they reject the safe food. I don't advertise, well, we have this alternative X, Y, and Z here. No. When we get to the table, if the safe food is rejected, then I could say, well, I see that, you know, you're not really wanting to eat the food that we have on the table tonight. We always have our alternatives. We have X, Y, and Z. And I also think I have leftovers of this if you prefer that. But it's no prep for you, right? It like may take you, they could get out of the fridge themselves, or you might be able to heat it up in 30 seconds, whatever. But when you know you are preparing a meal that you want to enjoy, and you still should, right? Because this is an exposure. Maybe they want to try it this time, or maybe you've offered it deconstructed and they want to try one of the 5 things that goes in there. So this is all skill building, right? But instead of thinking it like, oh my gosh, my child, you know, is not on the growth curve or is really struggling to eat, or we're going through a really rough patch, help them feel included at the meal. Just have that on the table as part of the meal. Change your mindset. This is not catering to them. This is helping everybody feel seen and safe, because you know this might be a more challenging meal.
Yeah. No, I really, I love a little coaching session in the middle of a podcast episode because it's true. I think everyone will relate to it too, because I do struggle with that sometimes. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, like I just want you to eat because we know that she needs to and everything. And then it creates like this whole dynamic.
And a power struggle. It's a power struggle.
Yeah. And I try not to bring it to the table because I know that it is a power struggle. And the more that I feed into the power struggle, the more the power struggle like grows. It's like adding, gasoline to a fire. Yeah, exactly. And so to me, I think it's really important to remember that. And we really try to do that each time. I'm really curious if you could share you mentioned the steam stuff that you add into that. I would love for you to share some examples, because I think probably parents out there, their ears kind of perked up a little bit like, ooh, tell me more. And I'm guessing what you're meaning is offering food in a really playful way.
Yes, and that too. But I did want to add one more thing about when you're concerned about a child not eating. And I think, we as parents, we have a lot of anxiety about our kids not eating. And so then we put all this pressure on ourselves, and our kids can feel that pressure, right? So by having it on the table, it just makes it like it's part of the meal. But I will tell you another tool that I use sometimes, and I call it an invitation food. So an invitation food for me is like something that feels, and you could think of your alternative as an invitation food, or the safe food as an invitation food, or it could be really something delicious and that your kids are asking, like we don't do dessert every day just because it's not something I put on the table always with dinner, but oftentimes the kids will be like, oh, can we have some cookies or chocolate or whatever? I'm like, okay, let's have it with dinner. And so that could be like an invitation food to get started sitting at the table, feeling welcomed, enjoying something, start that eating process, and then move on from there, because maybe they were overly hungry or overly stimulated, and now they've started eating, and it's a time of connection, and there isn't pressure, and you're not as concerned because they're eating something. And so you can move on they can themselves move on to other things at the table. Whereas if you're like, no, you can't have that, then it's that power struggle. And so, that doesn't mean you have to say yes every time, but it also doesn't mean you have to say no. And if you kind of have that reframe in your mind, like, well, this could be an invitation food and gets that eating process started, it might surprise you. And I don't know if you want to say something about that, or if I should roll right into the steam.
No, I actually really appreciate that, because I never called it an invitation food, but I definitely do that with my daughters too. I think sometimes even just like I'll even say to my husband, just putting the plate on the table and then just saying, hey, whenever you're ready, come on over here, and letting them run around the kitchen or whatever. And then them coming over and grabbing something has been something else that I've like allowed to be more flexible as well. And I think sometimes, like, you have this idea of eating has to be seated at the table, blah, 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 quiet, all this stuff. And I've noticed with my youngest, she is a little force to be reckoned with, and she wants to be standing. She wants to be walking around, which is not always the safest when it comes to eating and choking hazards and things like that. But I know that what I'm offering to her, she can handle if she is kind of like getting up and moving around. And so one of the things that I have noticed too, when it comes to being considerate, is allowing her to do that. She's more likely to eat if she can take a couple bites, get down, walk around the room a little bit, and then come back than when she was ever seated in her high chair and like locked in.
And I will say, just to add to that and a thought process, and I love that, because for me, that is really seeing that individual and making an accommodation that feels good, or at least good for now for your family. I do love a seated meal, or at least for the most part, and I like to create that structure. And so the one thing I will add to that, because that might never be okay for her, like I have ADHD combined type, and it is physically painful for me to sit down a lot of times. And maybe, it could just be the age. There's lots of things that could be going on. But one thing I will add as like a tip, and if other parents experience this struggle too, is create a routine before dinner that helps get movement in there and gets them to the table, even if it's for 5 minutes. And so that might look like, okay, it's, dinner's in 5 minutes, potty wash hands, and then we're having our dance party or something. And so doing something that is movement based before the meal. So, potty wash hands, dance party song. What song do you want tonight? Everybody, let's get our movement. Okay, now get your silverware and your, and whatever. Like, I have created a kitchen space that is attuned to kids. So like they can get their cups and their silverware and napkins for everybody, like building those life skills. They're part of the process. And that in and of itself is an invitation to come sit down at the table. And they've also had that extra movement. And, we can have in our mind, we'd like them to sit down. You could even do all of these things and it's still not, still doesn't feel good for this child to sit. But these are some things you can build into those times to maybe have a 5 minute where everybody is at peace and just enjoying the meal. So I'm going
to try that tonight, actually. I'm going to try it with her tonight, because I do notice that sometimes what we'll do is we'll be getting dinner ready and cooking and stuff. And sometimes my oldest will help me with stuff in the kitchen and cooking. And sometimes Noah will help set the table. But sometimes we'll put on a little show for them at that time, because we're in the kitchen and we can't see them from there. Mm-hmm. So sometimes we'll do a little show and it's quiet and then they're just kind of hanging out. And I can totally see them being like, all right, let's put on some music and like dance for a little while and then come and sit down and
yoga. There's like some cosmic yoga on YouTube. There's
that's really fun.
Things you could do. Or if they have a trampoline, like a little
we have one
on the inside. It could be like, okay, this is your minute of jumpies before, make it fun, make it part of this process or routine. Or
I love
it could be, all right, we're doing 3 animal walks before dinner. What are we doing? And then we're going to eat like that when we get to the table. So you're really thinking about it's not just the mindset of a child, but like the space and their movement and how you can bring them. Like when we're having challenges with one of my kiddos who is the most challenging, my husband's like, I really need help. And it's like, if I can flip the switch to something fun or playful that speaks to a different level of, I'm not just put your clothes on. It's like, okay, who are we today? Let's be a character. Let's dress like them, or make it fun and playful, storytelling, let them guide. It's going to change the environment, and we can harness that and use that around the table.
I think that's such a great idea. I'm definitely going to use that. Stay tuned.
Perfect.
I will share.
I can't wait to hear it. And then to get back to where you actually wanted to go. So the STEAM integration. So I love anything with play. I love anything with sensory. Sensory doesn't have to be tasting. It can be using the 5 senses or the 4 senses, touching, feeling. Like you can bring if you have a 2-year-old, washing the vegetables or helping, get kids' knives, peeling, whatever, hands-on, noticing the colors, noticing the shapes. And those are all wonderful. But the way my brain works and the desire to bring in meaningful learning experiences, and we know that there's such a great body of research of STEM or STEAM. So STEM is science, technology, engineering, and math. And STEAM is bringing arts into it. And in my opinion, arts is in everything STEAM. Like if you have an engineer, if they are going to engineer something, they need to be able to have that creativity and artistic skill to doodle it out. If you're creating a science experiment, you have to think, how am I going to set this up? And you're going to annotate the process. And as you're writing down that process, you're going to be drawing and you're bringing in all these elements, technology. If you're making an app, you have to think how that is going to look organizationally. And so I always say STEAM because arts is important. And I like to use that as an application or learning extension for food that can be with meals or completely outside of meal times. And so here's what that does. That creates a meaningful, lifelong skill building and critical thinking, problem solving into everyday life that they will bring with them lifelong. And it's a food exposure. They're learning something meaningful about food or about whatever they're doing. And it makes it really interesting and fun. So, you could be doing an acid-base test with purple cauliflower and seeing how different household items change the color of the purple cauliflower liquid because one's more acidic and one's more basic. And, you're getting hands-on with cauliflower and also it's purple cauliflower. That's really cool. And I'm going to cook this up tonight because we've used it for this experiment and it's just on the table. Well, they've already explored it and they've built that confidence around it that it is automatically an invitation to maybe want to taste test it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I really like that idea too, because then they've already seen it. I know that with my kids too, that the more I've engaged with them and helping with stuff, like when the first time I ever made kale chips for my oldest one, I had her peel all of the leaves off of it. Mm-hmm. And she was really engrossed in that whole process. I like bringing in the experiments into it, especially depending on the age of your child. Like
and
my daughter loves,
of your child.
Yeah. And my daughter loves any kind of experiment. She always wants to do little experiments and things like that. And just letting them kind of play with it and see what it's all about. I think it's a really great idea.
It's really empowering. My other book that I came out with in December is called STEAM Powered Food Adventures. And it is a STEAM activity inspiration book. And that is purposeful. Usually when you have a STEAM or a STEM book, it's going to be step-by-step, start to finish activities. And that's great too. And I have a free companion guide that goes with that book that has step-by-step activities. And then I have a printable activity pack, which is a paid activity pack, but that is specifically for children to use on their own, that has 5 step-by-step activities. But the intentionality of a open-ended STEAM invitation is because there is no wrong way to explore. And I have this saying, you choose your adventures in food. When I was a kid, there was the choose your own adventures stories. And I always loved that because I was part of this process. I was part of this adventure. And so the book opens up and telling you like all these things that you can do or you could do and what it means to be a food explorer and that it's all inclusive and no one size fits all. And so if you have a child who's very into technology or very into engineering or very into arts, and you have this inspiration to make beet stamps or, I don't know, make a snack that looks like a butterfly. Well, there isn't a wrong or a right way to do it. You can leave this open-ended with this idea and then let them use their creativity to implement it. And especially for kids who are on the spectrum who, might be derailed if they don't. And I have one child that I struggle with in a lot of ways because she's such a perfectionist. If any little thing is off, it is very hard and very emotional. But if there's no wrong way, then she is setting the path forward, and it's all based on that intrinsic drive and exploration. So,
how liberating! I love that. Yeah. Well, because it is really liberating. And also too, I hear a little bit of one thing that I'm thinking for myself is it puts a little bit pressure off the parent to come up with it and execute the activity. Because I think because it's for them to do. And I think that's one thing I'm glad that that's part of it. Because I think sometimes my daughters will come to me with this idea. I'm like, I just can't. Like, I was like, that sounds like a wonderful idea.
It's a lot of mental energy.
But I was like, but I can't execute that right now. I don't have all the tools to execute this right now. And so I love that it's like this open-ended,
it's like
choose your own adventure.
In crafts and play, they have this concept of loose parts. And so loose parts could be, if they set loose parts around the room that is open-ended and your kids can do whatever they want with it. It's not like this is what it should look like. It is, here's this, go explore. And that is, I'm giving you an idea, but it doesn't have to be executed in any one way. And so they're empowered, and it's less, well, it could be more work for the parent if you have a child who's like, we need to get this and I want to do this. But you could also say, hey, go into the pantry, or here, these are all the recyclables. Try something with this. I mean, for me also, it's even as simple as putting googly eyes on something or let's make up can you make up a song or a poem about this turnip, and then it's arts, right? It's a different kind of arts than you imagined, but it is a poem. It is a storytelling. Okay, make up a dance with this googly eyed turnip or this, parsnip, and I want to see you use that parsnip as an accessory in your dance. That's still arts. That's still using their body. That's still critical thinking and problem solving, but it's fun and it's using what kids do best. And that's their wonder and their curiosity and their play.
Yeah.
And there's no wrong way to do it.
I think we end the podcast there. That was like, I had this idea that we would go into some other stuff, but I think we're just going to have to have you back on, because I think that that's like the perfect way to leave the whole concept of becoming a food explorer, and to encouraging your children to enjoy and be curious and be playful and do what they do best. And that is play with their food and the things around them, and utilizing all of that and getting in there. And each one of those experiences is a new exposure to something new. The next time you serve parsnips, you can remember the parsnip song, and it can be something else. And then they might be like, oh yeah, maybe I'll try it, or maybe they won't. And that's also okay. They've been exposed to it. And then as they grow older, they're going to remember that parsnips wasn't the thing that my parents force fed me. It's this thing I made up a dance party with. And I think instead of being like, oh, I hate peas, I was force fed peas as a child. It's like a completely different thing. It's like, oh no, I arranged all of my peas into a world map, and it's like, just totally different.
100%. Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. I'm going to have to share links to your awesome books. That sounds like those are amazing. And everything too. I was already, as you were explaining and talking about them, like, I need to get this for Elodie. The Explorer one, I think she would really love that. And the different choosing your own adventures with food. And it's amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dani.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Is there anything that you want to impart on anybody as we wrap up? Any last minute thoughts or anything that doesn't have to be? But where people can find you, all of the things.
I think if I were going to leave you with anything, it would be stress less and have more fun. I think we can all have a little bit more compassion and grace for ourselves. And fed is fed, and there's no right or wrong way. So it's all about skill building and empowerment and enjoyment, because if we fast forward, they're not going to remember what they ate around the table, but they're going to remember how they felt. And I think we can bring a little bit more joy and drop the guilt at meal times. You can find me at kid.food.explorers on Instagram and Facebook. And hopefully my website will be back up and running soon. And you can find all my printable resources there, although the freebies are available now.
Awesome. Thank you so much. It was wonderful chatting with you. And I'm looking forward to having our next conversation around family food values at another time.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Hey friends, it's Dana, and thanks so much for listening to the Wholehearted Eating Podcast today. Find us on social media at Wholehearted Eating Pod on Instagram and at wholeheartedeating.com for more information about working with Dana and Christina for one-on-one nutrition counseling. If you love the show, we would love you forever if you'd share an episode with your family and friends, or tag us on social media, or leave a 5-star rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts to help more people find the show. Check out patreon.com/wholeheartedeating to help support the show and get access to ad-free episodes, bonus episodes with us and our guests, episode discussions, new resources we're creating for Patreon, and so much more. If you have questions for us, feedback on the show, potential topics or guests you'd love to have on, shoot us an email at hello@wholeheartedeating.com, and we'll see you next week.